these feet on fire. Heavy are your eyes and the weight on your shoulders.
Hi, I'm Dr. Chris Stevens, and this is the Psychology to Live By podcast.
Something you can touch, but you know when it's over. No control when you're running blind.
Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to Psychology to Live By. Today's a roundtable with some very creative and mentally well people. I'm joined by my friends from Network Music, Terry McBride, Chairman and CEO, Colleen Novak, Artist Manager, and Chris Norwood, Chief Strategy Officer. The podcast we're going to discuss together today is Music, Creativity and Mental Health with Harrison Storm. Our experienced and insightful participants have watched the podcast of that name, which you can see or listen to at my website, drchris.life, or wherever you get your podcasts. But I'll do a quick summary now before we get into our Q&A. So Harrison is an Australian indie folk singer and songwriter. We had a wonderful conversation about music, mental health and creativity, and we touched on many things, including Harrison's background in a fairly archetypal, masculine Australian culture and how that indirectly led to his musical career. Songwriting and singing as self-discovery and as emotional catharsis, and the centrality for Harrison of intuition for both his well-being and his creativity, as well as being in tune and true to himself. Harrison also spoke about his maturing as an artist and how he now takes a broader, less attached outlook with more refined listening and a more nuanced creative production. He talked about the importance of mindfulness and somatic therapy as methods to help him sustain his creative output, including using the PEM acting method to cultivate and elevate his experience of performance. Harrison also talked about the wonderful feeling of calm, connectedness and authentic communication in performance, and how performing in this way feels like a better version of myself. He talked about the distinction between entertainers and artists, and also the dilemma of a contemplative artistic life, and something I relate to, feeling guilty about not achieving enough each day. So you can see we covered a lot. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm really looking forward to discussing it with my friends at Network Music, who I'm sure will have a lot to say arising from this conversation. So, speaking of which, my good friends, are you all well?
Yes. And I'll go last because I know Harry really, really well. So,
Okay, all right. It's funny because I didn't end up referring to him as Harry, but that does sound a little bit more friendly, doesn't it, Harry?
he's definitely a Harry versus a Harrison.
Yeah, I think that's right. Hopefully next time we talk, I can call him Harry.
Slip it in and see what happens.
I'm sure he won't mind. I'm sure he won't mind. So who would like to kick off? As I said, there's a lot in this conversation. Let's just see where it takes us.
I can jump in. A lot of nuggets in this conversation for sure that caught my eye. The one that got my brain churning a bit was the sort of early on when y'all were talking about intuition, and in particular that the intuition to trust is the intuition of experts who are able to have that intuition informed by a rich set of experience within that subject matter to really hone where that intuition is pointing them. And we've talked. This is not necessarily a new concept; it's come up before, but really stuck out to me. It's just something I've been thinking about as well, because how do, even as an individual, how do I know whether to trust my intuition on it or not? Right? And, it reminds me of the is it the Dunning-Kruger effect, where like you think you know a lot about a subject that you actually don't know that much about. And the
Yeah.
more you learn about it, the more you realize that you don't know anything. And the
Yeah.
inflection point where your perceived knowledge and your actual knowledge are the same is a lot further down the line than I think people are aware of.
Yeah.
So
What's the old saying, Chris? A little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so I guess it's sort of like, me as an individual, what are some of the cues or clues that I could use? It's almost easier to identify when somebody else's intuition is leading them astray versus when me, myself, or us is trying to think about whether to listen to that intuition or not, and how we can navigate that effectively.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Yeah. So this is something I actually know something about. So uh, you guys will probably know that my doctorate was on the topic of creativity, and a huge part of that was the role of intuition. And so you quoted me earlier saying that I only trust the intuition of experts. So we'll start there, but also I want to talk about when should we use intuition, and maybe when should we not.
Mhm.
But I actually we probably should start with, well, what is intuition? Uh, so people will often talk about it as a gut feeling, right? Um, or a feeling of knowing, but almost always the word feeling is used to describe it, and so I think it is. It's not only, but an important component of it is it's visceral. It and and I think that that's an important dimension of any kind of knowledge that is not yet fully conscious. Right now, here's how I think about it. Basically, the human system is made to make sense of things, to be able to anticipate the world. And when we and to get traction with the world, like, so you've all raised kids, so you'll all understand that you watch kids, they're just absolute excitement when they master something, and they'll do it over and over once they've mastered it. But there's this sense of joyousness, positive feeling, certainly, when something makes sense that prior didn't make sense, or I've got some traction in the world that I didn't have. Conversely, we don't like confusion and contradiction very much. So, the face will frown, there'll be negative emotions. In other words, what I'm setting up here is a positive and negative emotional valence with respect to being able to get traction in the world and make sense of the world. Right? And I think intuition is, we know that cognition happens, most of it's unconscious, and so, for example, with experiences of insight, the aha moment, there are certain ways you can make it more likely people have an insight while they're in a functional MRI scanner, in a brain scanner. And what shows up is that the body has the insight about 3/4 of a second before the person is aware of the insight. So there is this sort of visceral excitement. There are certain brain regions that light up. And so there is this intuitive presentiment before the actual thing coheres in a way that I can then articulate it. Okay, so that's a long way of saying that intuition has this very important role when we're struggling in the darkness, as it were, or when we're not making the world make sense, or we can't figure out how to get traction in the world. And you can kind of see how it would have an evolutionary purpose. Okay, So then that's what intuition is. It's an incredibly valuable part of our way of operating. It's basically useful when we can't calculate the answer to something, when we have to find a new way of understanding something. And so that's a bit of an indicator of when we should use intuition. There's lots of, throughout the working day, we've all got our skills, our knowledge banks, and a lot of the time that's all we need to operate, except when it's not good enough, except when it doesn't give us access, right? So then we have to trust more in these sorts of feeling states. But now, why an expert rather than a novice? Because obviously we all have, and as you said, the Dunning-Kruger effect. People overestimate their knowledge, and people will overestimate their intuitions. I know it's right, they say, And so if you can imagine, though, someone has described intuition as thin slicing. It's like I think it's an analogy to putting slices on a slide and looking in a microscope. If you take a very thin cross section of a person's knowledge, as it were, the more knowledge they've got, the more complex that microscopic slide is going to be, the more likely it's going to capture something, right? So intuition that's based on a lot of knowledge is a lot more valuable. So I'll give you an example of that. I think I might have talked about this before, but I can't remember who the Formula One racing driver was, but it's a famous example. The guy's heading towards a corner, suddenly brakes. He has this feeling of dread, suddenly brakes. He doesn't know why. And as he comes around the corner, there's carnage. Now, he couldn't see the carnage, but something alerted him, something out of his deep experience and it was that he was leading the race. The people in the stand at the end of the corner were all looking not at him, but around the corner. And so that small detail was of high significance to his system. Whereas a novice driver would have gone around the corner at the same speed and would have had a terrible crash. Their intuitions about that corner would have led them astray.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, but your question was, when should you trust your own intuition? This guy called Thorne. No, I can't remember the guy's name, but he talked about. It might come to me. But he talked about. This is a psychological researcher. Talked about what he calls clue poor regions, or what he called a Klondike space. And you guys would know what the Klondike is, right? There was a gold rush there, and the difficulty in finding the gold was that normally people would use topographical features of the landscape to know where it would be, the alluvium and all that. But the Klondike's covered in meters of ice and snow, so it's a clue poor region for finding gold. So it's a nice metaphor for we should use intuition when we can't calculate the result, when we can't use obvious clues. So the artistic pursuit is a really good example of a clue poor region, a Klondike space, right? And the other thing is, I think, coming from what you said, Chris, we should know about the Dunning-Kruger effect and temper our knowing. And knowledge is power, and temper our own knowing when we realise I'm not an expert. Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting question. I think it's a very topical question. There's so much going on in the world. We were talking about this before we started recording. And so many of the issues I just don't understand very well because I'm not an expert. Mm. I don't really understand all the ins and outs of Iran and Gaza and trade wars and tariffs, and so it's quite, it that's where I'm probably not going to trust my intuitions, and I'm going to go searching out expertise.
Yeah.
How'd I do, Chris?
Good. Good. Yeah, yeah. And like that the context of like what's happening in the world also is a good one, because also on social media, everybody's got a take. Everybody's got an opinion.
Yeah,
And how many of those are actually the opinions of experts?
very few.
Very few.
Very few. And then, of course, the question is how you've got to sort the wheat from the chaff.
Right.
How do I find something
Right.
that I can actually trust? And I don't think there's ever been a time since I've been alive where drawing that distinction has been more important.
Yeah. And
And
it takes work,
oh yeah,
right? Because you can't just like read it and say, okay, cool, I'll take that on surface as being accurate, right? Like it takes cognitive load
yeah,
to critically contemplate something that you're reading. And when you're getting that volume of information coming at you,
yeah.
that puts a heavy cognitive load on an individual to try to sift through it all. It's challenging.
It's very challenging, and we live in a time where we've been encouraged not to do that kind of cognitive heavy lifting, right? We
Mhm.
get sucked by the algorithms into echo chambers that just reinforce our view.
Yeah.
So we don't like the contradictions. There's, it's no secret that I think that Trump is an abomination. However, I think there are some things, probably inadvertently, that he's doing that are actually quite useful, right? I think he's woken up Western Europe with respect to that America's not going to look after them militarily, and that the world order's changing. I think that was well overdue, and I wish we would attend to that in Australia. I don't want to get into politics on this, but you see what I'm getting at here is, but that creates a cognitive dissonance in me.
Right.
Yep. And so I think a lot of the heaviness now is that dissonance as well. It's not just that people may feel disenfranchised and powerless, et cetera, and worried about the world, but it's also, if we're honest, trying to take a really deeply balanced view. That's really hard work. Yeah. And just to bring it back to Harrison a bit, I think that that's the really hard labour of the artist. They're dwelling in spaces where there's a lot of ambiguity, a lot of nuance required. It's not straightforward. That authenticity that he was talking about is that searching for that more nuanced view. It's obviously it's not a transactional communication in that sense.
Yeah.
It's an intuitively laden communication. Alrighty, fantastic. That was easy. Not. What else
My
we got,
turn?
guys? Yeah, sure.
I always pay attention to people who mention the positives that come out of COVID, and he really tried to highlight some of the things that he learned from it and that he tried to work on during that time. And because you often hear about all the negative stuff, because there's a lot. Um, but I think that he's done a lot of work on himself, and I think that time allowed him to do that. It sounded like he was in a pretty rough spot before, which touring naturally can do to you.
Mm.
But then as he as it came around, just talking about how that underlying guilt of that you feel when you're not busy enough, or when somebody else has a different type of busyness, and when they are constantly comparing what they feel is accomplishing whatever it is, and working or whatever your busy day is, you just it's draining because you just feel, I feel like that all the time. You just feel like, are you doing enough?
Good enough. Yeah.
So it was
Yeah,
nice to hear
I
that,
think this
that
used to be called the Protestant work ethic, didn't it? Like, um, but yeah, like, and just can you be a little bit more specific? When he was talking about COVID, what was he saying that really spoke to you about how how COVID was helpful for him, how that period was helpful?
well, the way I interpreted it is just the time. He had been on
Yeah,
the road a lot and he was drinking and he was just not healthy, but
yeah,
having that time away and really made him reflect on himself, really.
yeah. It reminded me a little, when he spoke early on about as a young person. Whenever he was having a difficult time, he'd go to the bedroom and pick up the guitar. It's an archetypal image, isn't it? And he would write a song. And I guess COVID is like an extended period of going into your bedroom, like and and he obviously used it well in terms of self understanding and self insight.
Yeah, and he started the PEM method, and
Yeah,
how
that's
I
right.
that's how I heard it.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I'm not an expert on the PEM method, but I did look it up after my discussion with him, and it's a sort of very body based an emotion system around emotional expression, and obviously it really helped him. Ironically, he's doing that at a time when he couldn't do performance per se, but he took the opportunity to actually learn how to perform, which I thought was a very interesting insight, that a lot of musical artists actually don't get any training per se. Is that right, in performance? Yeah.
yeah, sink or
Uh,
swim a little bit.
yeah. Yeah. Which is really interesting, isn't it? I mean, given that they're, a very significant part of their income and their activity is performance. So, yeah. So, but the other thing that struck me about him, Colleen, is like he's very thoughtful, very reflective in that way. That he's quite a serious, and so he used that situation. I mean, there's another element here, of course, that this is not new, and that is that artists will often use times of difficulty. They'll mine it, and they'll make something worthwhile or beautiful from it. And I think this is about the kind of so this idea of making a sense of meaning and purpose. It's like I don't know, Viktor Frankl in the Second World War in the concentration camps. He wrote that book, Man's Search for Meaning, and talked about how the people that really didn't cope, didn't survive, were the ones who couldn't find any sense of meaning and purpose in the difficult time. And I think that's a very, very important function of the arts in general, to help us. Because you think about, novels, plays, films, music, art, visual art, are often about quite tough topics. I'm sure there's more dramas than comedies. I don't know if that's true, but even the comedies can be black, right? So I had that sense with Harrison that he mines all his experiences in this way. Yeah, but it was nice to hear that something good came out of COVID. It was good for me. I didn't have to travel anywhere. Suddenly I wasn't on a plane every second day. Yeah, and maybe learn a thing or two about using this medium.
Absolutely.
Now, this leaves the fellow in what looks to me in the top left of the Brady Bunch here. What's going on in that mind of yours, Terry?
Well, I thought I would lean into the sense of accomplishment because that's something that you shared with him,
Yeah.
in that he lives in a bungalow attached to a house with people that work 9 to 5 jobs, and they can't get their head around what he does all day.
Yeah.
And that leaves him with this, like, well, what have I accomplished today besides
Mm.
waking up and eating? And it's just
Yeah.
that sense of, a 9 to 5 job, you got things you got to do and check them off. Being in his space, that's actually not the case, unless he's having to do social media. And then
Yeah.
the other thing that I found interesting, and I've known Harry for about 8 years, is those initial songs. You know, you can feel the pain with inside the vocal, and I had forgotten about that. Like "Sense of Home" is it's a very painful song, right? "Change It All" is a step away from it, right? So you can see with the inside his music, his actual evolution that the two of you talked about.
Yeah.
And I think his newest album that's coming out in the near future is, again, it's a step along that winding, very winding path. But I,
Yeah.
I, I just thought it funny, and it was ironic that he lives with like 9 to 5 buddies, and like he's the token artist that lives out back in the bungalow. And like,
Yeah.
what did you do today, Harry?
It's interesting, isn't it? I was thinking about that as well. You know, there is a sense in which work, especially like 9 to 5 work, where a person has a job and there are structures around it and there are parameters, there are performance targets. It's kind of there's something very hard about that, of course, but there's also something that makes life easier about that. And what it makes easier is this sense of, well, what did I do today? Well, you run through your checklist of what you actually did. And then you can give yourself permission to feel like, okay, I'm a good person, or I've done well today, or I've achieved something. But when it's less tangible, and I think this is true for all artists, there can be days when there seems to be nothing that's been produced. And certainly not something that you can then just say to a person, well, I did this, right? One's day may have been very valuable, but not something one could communicate. And when he spoke about that, apart from me empathizing, because I feel that a lot, it also reminded me of just our social nature. It's difficult to live in a context, like in his context, his flatmates, they live in a different social, psychological world, and we're not immune to that. If he's going to feel that difference, right? And knowing about it does help a little, but it doesn't take away the experience of feeling like people may think that I'm a bludger. Oh, bludger is Australian for a lazy person. Yeah, and so that's very human as well, right? That's just resonating to these natural social feelings that come up, where he's picking up on those judgments. Now, the other thing you were addressing there, Terry, was, and obviously, as you said, you've known him for quite a while, and is this progression in his art, beginning with really strong, darker feelings. I don't know whether it's the case, but I think it might be the case that there is a fairly natural progression for artists. Not necessarily that they start dark and they end light, but where there's a more complex, more refining process that goes on as the person matures and they see. It's a bit like before when we were talking about intuition and complexity and ambiguity. That, as you get older and older, hopefully less prone to the Dunning-Kruger effect, you realise that, you don't know that much. I drive my poor wife insane, as you probably all know, because I'm always saying, what's it all mean, darling? Like, and I said to her this morning, I said, she said, you don't know nothing. and I said, well, no, I know something. And then I paused and I thought, actually, do I even know something? So I think, as you get older, you realise you don't know much. Jonathan Schooler was a well-known, famous physicist, and he said, as the island of our knowledge grows, so does the shoreline of our ignorance.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that's the sort of thing that can inform that growing complexity in an artist. It's this thing. It's not just. And the other thing I think, and this is from my time, my mother was director of the literature board of the Australian Council for the Arts, and that gave me the opportunity on my summer breaks to work as an assistant project officer when they were processing all the writing grants to Australian writers, and so I got to know these very experienced writers who are on the board, making the decisions about who gets the money. And one of the things that one of them told me was that there's this sort of natural progression that when say a novelist, their first novel, it's almost always pretty autobiographical. It's about themselves. But as they mature, their purview becomes much broader. They start thinking about the world and others. And so, it's not that the first work can't be a great work, but there is this natural progression where the person, I think, they've got to sort of write themselves out of, get that out in the first one so that they can start actually seeing a bit more clearly the complexities of the world around them. And so that's going to be naturally then, I think, have more emotional range. Hopefully that's what happens as we mature. But looking around the world, it does not appear to be inevitable. It's a definite possibility and a trend, but it's not inevitable. I think we got to work at it. But he's a very, I found it very, I really enjoyed talking with him. I found him a very interesting person, a person who thinks about life quite deeply. And I can now sort of follow him on various social media things and, kind of see. He does wear in a good sense, his heart on his sleeve, Yep. Not in a self-indulgent sense, but in a very honest, authentic sense.
He's very humble.
Yeah. Yeah. And he has what I call, not I call, but in the literature it's been called appreciative humility.
Yeah.
Right. So he's got there's ego strength there. Like you can see he's grown in his artistic confidence, but he can also appreciate others.
Yep.
Right. And that's the hallmark of appreciative humility. It's something that for us all to aspire to. To have some self-confidence and belief in what we're capable of at the same time as being able to really appreciate others. So it's the opposite to, sort of the more narcissistic values that are being foisted upon people,
Yeah.
All right. Any more observations before we wrap this up?
No, except watch it. It's a really good one.
It is a really good one, and I do recommend Harrison's music to people as well. But also, I think the conversation is very much worth watching, so I recommend it as well.
Yeah.
Okie dokie. Lovely as always to see you. always feel uplifted after these conversations. It takes me a little while to come down a bit. Maybe it's a bit like a performance in itself. Anyway, we will catch up soon. I think we have part 2 of a series that we're doing on maintaining our equanimity in difficult times. All right, my friends, take care of yourselves, and I'll catch you later. You've been listening to the Psychology to Live By podcast. If you'd like to know more, my website is www.drchris.life, and click on the videos tab to find links to all my social media. If you like the podcast, tell people that you like, so they can like it too. And the beautiful song you've been listening to in the background is Be Slow by Harrison Storm.